Um, First of all, I want to ask you, have you been enjoying the conference? Let me hear a round of applause if you have. All right, that's pretty good. But how about your devices? Have you been enjoying those? Oh, yeah, right? You know, you get one of those. We don't. So enjoy it because they're pretty cool. Get the chance to work with some of those at work, and they're really neat. Well, my name is Israel Hilerio, and I am a principal program manager in the Internet Explorer team. And the area that I work is in the web platform. And we've been working very hard to ensure that we can provide this really cohesive environment for you that works both across Metro-style applications and the web. Because we feel like this ubiquitous platform that we are going to be providing you allows you to take your skill sets and transfer them. And you can go both ways and work. So a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about today is going to be applicable to both of those. Let's see how I can use this. So one of the things that we're going to be learning today, right, is the benefits of making your Metro-style apps or your websites offline aware. And really is by taking advantage of some of these caching, client storage, and offline events that the platform now provides. And one of the things that we want to start with is by showing you that it is a continuum. It is really a spectrum. When somebody tells you, hey, why don't you go ahead and just take your website offline, or why don't you go ahead and take this connected application offline, it's not just magic. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of thought, because there's a lot of intricacies and dependencies that you need to be able to figure out, right? But we'll see that continuum, and then we'll go ahead and understand the technologies that make all of that possible. So before we get started, one of the things that I want to show you is where does our technology fit? When we talk about the web platform, we're talking about the set of technologies, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, that allows us to build both Metro-style applications and desktop, i.e. website applications, right? And I'm going to be using that term interchangeably, apps, to mean both websites and Metro-style apps. Because at the end of the day, the technology that powers it all together is the same one. When you look at these Metro-style apps, right, we want to really make them behave nicely when there is some network connectivity loss. So what does that mean? That in many cases, whether it's a Metro-style app or whether it's a website, you want to ensure that you're able to deal with this sort of gaps of connectivity. Like, for example, I'm at home and I go from one room to another and I lose connection, right? Or whether you're at work and you're going through this dead spot. Or in some cases, we want to even enhance the experience to be able to fully support a totally disconnected capability that is applicable to your applications. Because when you're, for example, writing an email, you want to be able to do that whether you're connected or not, right? Many of us use email clients today because they enable us to do that. But wouldn't it be cool if we can actually use that same technology such that you can enable it via web technologies and still be able to use it offline? So the advantage of that is that it will provide us this smooth and rich experience when you're using all of these applications. So let's right away see what are some of the benefits. And the best way that I can think of is by showing you a demo. Now, I want to see some hands of how many of you like to cook. There you go. Awesome. I like to cook, I just don't have as much time. That's what I tell my wife anyways. You know? But one of the things that I really like is to go to the Food Network. How many of you are familiar with the Food Network? Let me see a raise of hands, right? I love the Food Network. It's really awesome. I get to go see different shows. I get to see all the foodie things that they do. And every time I want to experiment with something, I go in and I check out the fan favorites. There's a site in their website that lets me see what fans like, which recipes they like. And that's really neat. So let me actually go ahead and switch you over because I want to share that with you. And here we go. In here, this is live from foodnetwork.com. right? And you can see that I'm there. These are the top rated recipes. I can go to the next photo, and I can see the cookies. I'm starting to get hungry, huh? I can go here. I can see the enchiladas. From there, I can select the recipe, and I'm able to see all my ingredients and all of the directions on how to make that recipe. Well, that's really cool. Normally, in my flow events, what I will do is I will go ahead and print this out and then go to the supermarket. And when I'm in the supermarket, I'll be looking for, oh yeah, all the things that I need to be able to make this happen, right? But the problem is that all of a sudden, your supermarket or your specialty store doesn't have some ingredients. And now you're in a bind. Now you have to get your little phone out. You have to start kind of looking, right? Or no, in worst cases, you don't have any connectivity at all. So that's a real big problem. Because now what are you going to cook, right? And the children waiting at home, and the wife waiting at home, or the husband, right? So it's a problem. So what we did is we teamed up with a Food Network team to be able to come up and develop a prototype of what it would be like if this particular part of their site could be used offline. So let me demonstrate that for you. In here, we got our Food Network demo, right? And this is using all HTML5 technologies. And one of the disclaimers that I want to show you is, here's my local web server. Notice that it's off. So I'm not cheating, okay? I'm not serving anything. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take us off the network. So look at the little X on the bottom right-hand corner, not connected. And just to make things more interesting, I'm going to go to my browser, IE, of course, and I'm going to go ahead and clear my cache. Oh, I only got three things, so that's not too bad. Let's see. All right. Delete. It doesn't want to delete them for some reason. Okay. Delete. Well, there's only three things, so you get the message, right? All right. So now, we're going to go in, and we're going to, again, bring the browser up. And I'm going to go to my Food Network demo. And there it is, right? So now what is interesting is that this is a full-fledged site. I can go ahead and start looking, like I was before I went to the store, at all of the recipes. I can see the cookies. I can see the enchiladas. Oh, that was great. And remember, what is interesting is that if I was using HTTP caching, this would be pretty much the end of the story, because this is the last thing that I access. But what is neat is that using this new set of technologies that are available in HTML5, I'm able to continue the story. So now I can go ahead and say, oh, wow, pumpkin bars, that's pretty neat. Oh, lemon ricotta, that's pretty cool. Maybe I just say, well, you know what? I'm going to give up on Mexican. I'm not going to go ahead and do the enchiladas. I'm going to go in and search. Oh, wow, what am I going to search? I'm going to search for American. And then when I go look at it, oh, look at that. All of the stuff that was there. Notice that all of that information was pre-cached in some cases, and in other cases, that is not really just files. That's actually metadata, or information about the recipe itself, which is stored in JavaScript objects that I happen to have stored in a local database that we're providing as part of our IndexedDB support. And the nice thing about that is that then I can say, you know what? That meatloaf, yeah, Alton Brown, I like the way he cooks, right? So let's go there. You know, we're all techies. He's kind of a techie foodie guy. So we're going to go in there and look at his recipe. All right, and as I'm at the store, the nice thing is that all I have to do is take my tablet with a Wi-Fi connection that only works at home and take it with me. And all of a sudden, when I enter this URL in the tablet at the supermarket, it just works. And when I start searching for things that I didn't even know were available to me, they just work. Right? Because that is the whole point of this. We want to create this experience such that it just works. And me as an end user, I don't have to worry about this. Connectivity, I go to one room, oh no, I have to go to the other one because that's the only place that I can get the connectivity, right? I'm able to just use the app which is what I want to do. So now, let's go back. Actually, I'll show you a couple more things because this is a really cool app. You can go ahead and access directly the recipes. You can look at the chicken, if you like that one. That's from Paula Deen. That's real good southern cooking there. And you can go ahead and search for other things, cheese, right? And then you can see my enchiladas come up and my gorilla bread. And all of these things are information that I was able to create in my local store, in my index TV database, as opposed to my local store, because that was another technology that we'll cover a little bit more details later. So let's go back to the presentation, to the PowerPoint. And what's interesting here to notice is the benefits. So from a website perspective, what are the benefits that I get when I start embracing this offline awareness, right? What I get is that I'm able to handle these connectivity failures. How many times have you not been at a site and you're entering all of your travel information, and all of a sudden you hit submit, and guess what? Sorry, no network connectivity, right? Try again. That's a bummer. That's really disrupts your user experience. So wouldn't it be nice if you could just go in and just develop your application such that you are aware of that and you're able to deal with those connectivity failures by enabling some caching and some local store. The nice thing about this is that you can access, in some cases, content offline. In other cases, depending on the level of sophistication and complexity of your apps, you might be able to even do content creation offline so that at a later time you can sync that up. And the nice thing is that overall, at the end of the day, these things not only give you the offline capabilities or the gracious offline behavior, but they also allow you to be able to have some performance improvements because I don't have to keep going round tripping to the server to get information all the time, which reduces your overall cost. Now, from a Metro-style app, what is it that we gain benefit-wise? Because after all, we know that Metro-style apps are packaged really nicely. You have everything that you need in a little nice package, and then you ship that to the store, and then you download that from the store, right? But what are the benefits? The nice thing is that in many cases, as the content becomes more rich and rich, and it starts to live in the cloud, like most contents these days, right? You want to be able to bring that down, cache it, and allow the application to treat it as if it was local storage, local content. And you want to do that in a very seamless way such that your application behaves just as if it was all locally cached, as if it was all offline available. And in some cases, you can make the claim that Metro-style applications, the bar is pretty high in the sense that the expectations are higher because normally my wife, when she's playing with the web and she hits one of these, dead spots, she goes like, oh, it's the web, right? Didn't have access to it. But when she's using an application, she expects that to work all the time. So you can claim that that's really important. The other thing that's kind of nice is that you can embed these applications in such a way that you're able to take advantage of these web resources, bring them to this local compartment that you are executing and displaying inside of your app, and then cache all that information such that, in a sense, if you want to rebrand your app every month or so, instead of having to go in and have the user go through the store to install an upgrade, all you have to do is just refresh the content of the web. And then automatically, you'll see the new assets for your rebranded application being available to you. And then because of these offline technologies, you'll be able to take them offline and use them. And people will know. So it's like a way of refreshing your content and keep it and make it available offline. So what are the types of applications that we normally think of when we look at this? Well, as we talk, it's really a spectrum. And it starts with the simplest one, right? Which is, hey, I have a set of pretty much static assets. That set of static assets allow me to go in and basically just sort of make a little package and have that package be something that I have on the web. And when I download it and I'm accessing that package, all of it is cached normally, and there's enough information in there such that whenever I type http://foo.com, right, the name resolution happens locally against what has been cached, right? So this is sort of the most basic one. Then you can increase the complexity. You can say, oh, now I need to go ahead and start getting little bits and pieces of information or data, normally text data, from my users that I may want to keep, like game scores. And in some cases, I want to push that information up to the cloud so that people can, remember all their scores, right? And that additional awareness of, oh, am I connected or not? Where do I store that piece of information that I'm getting from the user or that I'm keeping for the user? All of that is now something you have to deal with. The other one is now starting to get a little bit more interesting in that now if you want to incorporate file management or file manipulations from your local machine to the cloud, now you have to start looking at other types of elements in which now you're able to say, this file that I'm working on, I'm going to snapshot it. I'm going to create a new version of it by putting it in this system that is going to go ahead and save it and eventually load it up to the cloud like we normally do with email, right? When you want to go ahead and kind of keep a copy of your latest Word document that you're working on, you say, oh, let me email it to myself. And then that kind of puts it in there, and you know that that copy that you put in the email bin is not going to change. So in a similar way, you want to be able to combine this technology such that when I'm working with this file that lives in the operating system, I'm able to snapshot it and put it away and make a copy of it such that I'm able to continue to work on it and don't affect what I wanted to share with the rest of the world. Then you look at my recipe book type application, which basically now is dealing with not just files, but actual objects. I'm dealing with JavaScript objects with structured data, right? There are relationships. In some cases, these objects may have cyclic relations. And then, and because of that, they're really complex objects. But you want to be able to store that somewhere and then bring the whole association back to continue to manipulate it. And in those cases, you're talking about a lot more data. As an example, if you're looking at your inbox, it might be around 500 megabytes of data for the latest set of emails that you're gathering. And then all the way at the end is the ultimate, right? The email client, where I'm able to go ahead and whether it's Gmail or whether it's Hotmail or whether it's OA, create a full web-based experience that can work offline. So let's start by looking at what technologies make this happen, right? And when we start looking at the spectrum, you start seeing that we have different HTML5 technologies. The first one being app cache. An app cache allows me to cache resources locally. And we'll explain what the differences between that and HTTP caching is in a little bit. Then you have DOM storage, which allows me to store small pieces of information in the system such that I'm able to retrieve them at a later time. And those are like scores and things like that. And then you start or continue by looking at whether I'm connected or not. What kind of online and offline events do I have? Followed by file and blob APIs, which allows me to create that notion of snapshotting that we were talking about between the file system and information that I might push to the cloud. With IndexedDB followed, which allows me to take large pieces of information of structured data and create a full searchable, indexable database that lives in the client. And then taking that information that you build in your client and being able to push it to the cloud. And you may do that by using XML HTTP request, WebSockets, or those kinds of technologies. So let's look at the app cache, right? And we're going to start by looking at the app cache kids demo. And let's go, all right, so here we are. We're going to look at this kids book, but now, first of all, first thing we're going to do is we're going to start the server, right? Because the scenario that I have here is one that I kind of encounter all the time, right? In which I'm at home, I got kids, you know, my kids, they're kind of playing, they're at home very focused on their playing, on the tablet, right? And all of a sudden, it's time to go. We got to go, right? And then we put all the kids in the car and we take off. And especially when you talk about the toddler, the one that just sees the tablet and starts going like that, right? Because he knows that something will happen. When he starts playing with the tablet and the application, he is so well entertained. It is awesome. Because I don't have to worry about him screaming in the back of the car seat or anything, right? So when we go places, it is nice to have this entertainment for him. So now imagine the scenario in which we're here. He's playing around, right? He's looking at this stuff. Let's see. Let's go ahead and bring it back up. Right? He's using the app. He's able to go there. He's kind of discovering things as he's interacting with this kid's book, right? He's going in. And he's playing around, right? This is all fun and games. And all of a sudden, it's time to go, right? So it's time to go. So that means he needs to shut down the application. We have to take it away from him, and we have to go. So now let's go ahead and pretend that we're doing that by basically a couple things. First of all, we still don't have any network connectivity, which is good. We're going to go ahead and stop the server, all right? And now we're going to go back and pretend that we're at the car, right? And in the car, he's going to go ahead and I'm going to give him the tablet again and say, please be quiet, just play with this. And I'm going to bring the kids' book story. And in here, I'm going to go ahead and have him start playing with it. And what happens is that he starts accessing the whole environment again, just like before. And not only that, but the app caching that we've done, because this is a self-contained application, allow me to pre-fetch information that he hasn't even gotten to yet. Right? So in here, a couple of things. Actually, let's go back. And like we've done before, let's remove all of these things. All right. And let's start the application again so you can see that I'm not cheating. So here we go. When we bring now the kids' book, notice that it shows me that I'm disconnected now. Right? Because it's getting the information now that, hey, I'm not in the network, and it's showing me here that I'm also offline enabled, right? And when I start now going to the next screen, guess what? I'm able to continue the experience because all of this information that is part of this application was bundled in such a way that it was capable of being expressed to the system so that it can download all these pieces ahead of time. Okay, keep going. And the nice thing about this is that from a user experience, this is all fun and games, right? You know, we continue to have fun.
Girl.
All of the files that you see here were cached. Everything is great. And the interesting thing about this, in reference to like HTTP caching, is that with HTTP caching, once your temporary internet files are gone, it's over. That's it. And that can happen if you browse a lot. So there's no way to guarantee this experience other than using app cache in this particular case. So let's go in and look at what is happening behind the scenes. What's happening is that the first time that you go to the internet and you make the request by typing the URL, behind the scenes, we look to see if there's a manifest tag in the HTML body. At that point, we realize that there is. We look at that manifest file, and we start downloading resources and creating an application cache, an app cache. From there, once it is all created and all the resources were able to be downloaded and accessed, all transactionally, is an all or nothing thing, right? Then the next time that you start the browser, you start seeing all the information that comes up very quickly because it's coming from the cache directly, right? And then whether you have internet or not, it doesn't matter because all of this information now is coming from the cache. So that sounds pretty good, but what happens then in terms of the association? How easy is this to make? Well, basically, you have your HTML file, which you have today, and then you have your new manifest file, which you're going to be specifying. The manifest file has 3 or 4 pieces if you count the header, which you always have to have, which is a cache manifest. And then you end up having these other areas, which gives me the ability to define 3 types of resources. The first resource, called the cache, lets me specify all the files that I'm going to be telling the system that needs to be downloaded permanently into my machine, right? Cache into my machine. Then there's also a network section. And in that network section, I'm able to specify all of the network resources that I only want to allow to be loaded from the network. So it's a way of excluding things. So that way you're able to guarantee what is it that you're expecting from the network, which is the security piece. And then you're able to also define a set of fallback resources. And the set of fallback resources allow me to go in and say, you know, if this particular resource or file is not found, or this set of files are not found, then use this one as its replacement, right? And this is what we're saying here, where we're saying, hey, for kit.png, if that's not in the network is not able to give it to you, then just show the no image PNG, right? And the nice thing is that all of that, once we define that manifest file, all we need to do is modify our HTML5 with just one more attribute that goes in the HTML tag itself. Once you do that, that's it. One caveat, and this is something that we experienced recently as we were doing the test drive ourselves at Microsoft. The manifest file has to have a text cache manifest MIME type. Otherwise, your systems, your browsers don't recognize it, and it thinks it's just text, right? So that's why if you were trying to access these demos earlier, as of before today, before right now, you might have had problems. But we fixed that by going in and specifying the right MIME type for the .manifest file. So that's just a little caveat, and sometimes it can take a while. So now, how do we update things? So if you notice here, we're going to go ahead and now add this fish.png that we want to be able to now cache. The moment we do that, the system is smart enough to know the next time you visit the site that what? Oh, well, I'm going to go ahead and you enter the same URL. First of all, we're going to load always from the cache because that's how we guarantee that speed and performance. But then behind the scenes, we're going to check the manifest file to see if it has changed. The moment that we detect that it has changed, we start downloading it, right? And we create a new version of that application cache. And the benefits of doing that is that now we're able to go in and have an updated one such that whenever you go ahead and refresh the page, the new display that shows is going to be based on the new information that you put there, right? So that is one of the benefits, and it was as simple as that, such that next time you go into the network, you don't have to worry. You'll always get the new one that you specify. Now, so in summary, the benefits that we get out of doing the application cache is that it allows us to have this sort of caching mechanism that your applications can take advantage of, and that is very easily updatable by just changing the manifest content, and also that can be serving as a way to prefetch information and resources that you're going to display at a later time, thus improving the overall experience and performance of your site. Now, the interesting thing about this is that we say, so what is the benefit of this to these, metro-style applications, right? And there was a little talk yesterday that one of our colleagues had in which he said that application cache was really not that useful for metro-style applications. And I want to correct that because there are really two ways in which we see this being used. One of them is, first of all, if you have iframes in your application, right, and you want to display all of that content, right, and you want to be able to now take that content with you and use it offline. Well, this is a great way of ensuring that the content that you're displaying through the iframe will be available for you offline. That's number one. Second, and this is something that we're looking into providing, it's not finalized yet, is the ability to use resources, specify a manifest file in an HTML page that actually ships with the package that you're creating. And once you do that, the idea is that you can specify in that manifest file all the resources that you want to download from the network that then you'll be able to use offline. So it's a way of very quickly refreshing the experience all the time without having to reinstall or upgrade the application, right? So those are some of the big benefits that we see when we're thinking about application caches. So moving along, we talked about how DOM storage allows us to be able to store small amounts of information here and there. So when is a scenario that I would want to use that? Imagine that now I have a video game, right? And we're creating this video game, and one of the things I want to do is I want to take your scores and be able to upload them to, some server in the cloud that keeps track of all of my users' scores. The benefits of doing this is that now you have this whole community, everything is growing, everybody kind of knows each other's scores. But one of the problems is that in many situations like that, when you lose connectivity, you're in the middle of playing the game, right? Your HTTP caching is working, but then all of a sudden you finish and you're going to submit your scores to the cloud. What happens? Your application goes kind of crazy because it's not ready to handle the fact that it is not connected. And it's not capable of knowing then what to do with this data. We try to access the server. It wasn't there, so I'm just timing out, right? And it's just a terrible experience. So what we're going to be doing, let me go back here. So I'm going to show you how you can use DOM storage to be able to create this sort of environment of the game and be able to, from there, keep track of information. So you can see that I've already played this game a couple of times. Oh, by the way, just so you know, right? We still turned off, so I'm not cheating. And then in here, you can see the different scores that I've already gotten. The game is completely available offline for me, so that means I can actually play it. So I can go like that. Oh, that's cool. Look, I got 100 points. So I can continue to interact with it, right? And if you notice this 200 now, when I close the browser and I bring it back up, right, this information will be preserved. Whoop, what happened there? Wait a minute, did I not just, hold on a minute. Let's make sure. Maybe it didn't like my score. Let's see. All right. All right, that's good, that's good. I'm not going to go ahead and play it anymore, but let's see. Let's see. And let's bring it back up. Drum roll, please. Oh, for some reason it's not working. This is interesting. It was working earlier. The connectivity, the idea is that the actual information is being stored in the app cache piece. And I don't know, I know why it's not. It's because it's not a high score. That's why. So that's a bummer. I need to actually beat my own score in order to get that. Well, that's going to actually, I don't know. I'll give it a little bit of a try, but I don't know if it's going to happen, Gee whiz. All right. So anyways, so in this case, as you can see, all right, maybe we'll have something going. The benefit of this is that if all you want to keep is high scores, this works great. If you want to have a demo like mine, where actually I want to show you a low score, it doesn't work, because I have to actually be here playing for a while, right? But anyways, that's the reason why you're seeing this interaction that's happening right now. But let me see. Yes, okay, one more. Let's see, because we should be able to kind of show you this thing here working. All right, one more. All right, 1800, 2000. Okay, so now, if you notice, that should have replaced one of my scores, right? All right, let's see. Drum roll. Are we going? Yes, 2000. Thank you. All right, woo! All right, I didn't kind of account for that. Having to play the game for you guys. All right, so let's go back to the PowerPoint here. So what is it that you're seeing, right? In this particular case, I was able to understand that I was working offline, and the application continued to work just seamlessly, right? No big issues. Now, how difficult is it to do this? Well, using DOM storage is actually one of the simplest APIs that you'll ever see. All you have to do is start by going to the window object and getting the local store object. Once you have an access to that local store object, all you have to do is check to see if you've created any properties on it. And if the property exists, you can retrieve it. It's very, very simple. And if the property doesn't exist, you can just create it. So once you have that, that's the type of sophisticated interaction that you're able to do, right? So it's very, very simple. Now, when we look at what are the overall benefits, right? We use DOM storage to store small amounts of text, really, to be used at a later time. And using DOM storage has certain benefits over cookies. One of the benefits is that with cookies, you normally have to do a lot of encoding. And with DOM storage, you don't have to. It's just a straight up, this is text, it's going to go there, and it's going to be stored. So it gives you this nice name-value pair mechanism. The other nice thing is that, unlike cookies, that information doesn't get broadcast to the server again every time you make a request, which is really nice because it gives you some performance advantages in terms of payload. And the other thing is that that information can be accessed either per session or it can be accessed per domain. And you have the ability to specify that. Now, when I'm writing Windows Metro-style applications, the important thing to remember is that there is another mechanism that I could use instead of DOM storage, and that is called application data. And some of the benefits that application data has is that this new Windows Runtime API gives me the ability to store more than just text. It lets me store structured data. And it also lets me do the ability to store groups of information. So let's say that there is a mechanism that requires first name, last name, and age. I'm able to create that grouping and store that in my application data. And what's really neat about this is that then the system will automatically roam that data for me using the application data infrastructure. So when you're creating a Metro-style application, you want to ensure that you're using the application data because it provides a lot more benefits than just simple DOM storage like you use on the web. Now, the next thing is the offline events. How difficult is that, right? We talked about the need to be aware of the fact that you're connected or not. So in this case, really all it takes is just to look up at this particular property. You go to Navigator, and from Navigator, you check to see whether you're online or not. But you can get more sophisticated than that, and you can define events. So you can define an event that lets you know whether you are online or whether you are offline. And then in your event handler, all you have to do is look at the type of event that you received. And when it is online, guess what? You are connected to a network. When it is offline, that means you are not connected to a network. Now, a couple of things that are interesting. Look how vague I am being. And I say, not connected to a network, as opposed to not connected to the internet or not connected, to your browser. Because really, it is a very simple API, but it's also a very simple capability that it provides you. All it knows is that if you happen to be in your home network, even if your home network is not connected to the web, it'll tell you that you're connected, right? Because it doesn't know any more than that. If you happen to have no network connectivity like I have right now, it's smart enough to let you know, yeah, you're not connected. But you need to be, in some cases, a little bit more sophisticated and think about the fact that you may have to ping your server. And the way to ping your server is maybe you try to open a connection. You go ahead and do a WebSocket connection. Or you do an XHR connection and you try to open it. And if you do have that 200 that comes back and lets you know that your server's there, then for sure you know that you have access to your server and that you're truly connected. But this is a great way to initially disambiguate that. At least you know that you're connected to a network. That's a good start, right? So the nice thing about this is that this starts to introduce a little bit of a different behavior to the type of applications that you build. Because now you start to think about the fact that the network is not something that you can just take for granted. You have to start thinking to the fact that the network is something that you need to be aware of, and that you still need to be able to function correctly even when that is not there. So now, let's look at another type of application. So we talked about the ability to have these kind of share applications that, these applications that share files, that you share files with others, that you're able to, sort of snapshot information and send it out to the cloud. And in order to enable that, you want to ensure that you don't end up modifying the file that you think that you snapshot such that you're sending the latest as opposed to really sending the one that you intended to be sent. So imagine the case in which I am having a file, right? And this file is something that I'm manipulating. And in this image file, I like to send it to multiple friends of mine. And by doing that, what I do is that I might make, different annotations to it. Every time that I make an annotation to it for a different friend, I want to make sure that I'm able to put the right information, snapshot it, and send it out. Well, in this case, what we have here, once I switch screens, is this file API usage, right? And again, we are offline, right? And in this case, what I'm able to do is that I have a set of already preloaded images that are in my internal system via IndexedDB. So I can go ahead and show the flowers. I'm able to access the desert pictures from my database or the lighthouse. And the nice thing about this is that all these photos were taken from my local file system. And once they are there in my database, it doesn't matter what I do to them in the operating system because at that point, they're sort of nicely stored and checked in. So let's go ahead and go through one of them. Let's go ahead and bring up an app. I'll get the penguins because koalas are personal. I don't want to offend anybody, But penguins, more people mess with them. So let's go with penguins. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and display the file. There you go. It's kind of cool. I'm going to go ahead and save it to the database now. And just to prove it is there, I'm going to go back, go to my file, go to my penguins. And they're there. Right, great. So now we're going to go in to my file system where the penguins were stored. And I'm going to bring up Paint. Yep, and we're going to mess with the penguins here a little bit. I don't know. I'll put little stars, I guess. That's, no, that's weird. Hold on. That's just too weird. Okay, not stars. We're going to go ahead, put hearts. There you go. Everybody likes hearts. There you go. We got to put little hearts in the penguins. They're just lovely. Anyways, now we're going to save this file, right? And you're going to notice, when I look there, yep, they have the hearts. And now we're going to go back to my little app, right? My file demo. load up my penguins, and you can see that that's intact, right? And that's the kind of capabilities that you expect, because as you continue to work in your latest drafts, as you continue to work and modify these files, you want to ensure that you have the flexibility to be able to put them aside, create these snapshot copies, and then be able to continue doing your work. Imagine being in a plane, right? And you say, oh, I created this email. I'm going to go ahead and with this text that I created, I'm going to send it out. And then I'm going to put this document, this Word document, right? And then once you actually sort of queue it up for email sending, because you're offline, you want to continue to keep working on that. And then you haven't really proofread the new part as much. But then you get to the airport, and automatically you sync. Well, you don't want that new piece of information, which you haven't reviewed with others, to actually make it in its way out, right? You want to make sure that only the pieces that you've reviewed that are good to share are the ones that go out. So let's go back, and let's look at what is happening behind the scenes, right? We start with a file system. Then we use the input type file tag. That allows us to bring up the file dialog, and from there, we're able to retrieve a file object. File objects actually inherit from blob, so you have all the blob capabilities, which means that you can go in and you can say, hey, this blob, I want to be able to show it in the canvas, right? And in order to do that, I might end up calling one of our new APIs, which lets you take url.createObjectURL, and then it lets you put that source into the canvas so that you can display it. Or you might be able to actually make the modifications to this particular file or image in the canvas, and then use canvas.ms to blob to create a new blob from the canvas. So you can imagine doing all kinds of pixel manipulations in the canvas, and then coming back and generating a file from that, right? Or you can potentially take this blob and use XML HTTP request.send to actually fetch it and put it, upload it into a file, into a web server. Now, scenario number 2 is very similar, but you use drag and drop. And drag and drop also gives you a file object. And because it is, again, a blob, you can put it in the cloud, or you can store it to the database, like we did, using IndexedDB. Because IndexedDB supports the ability to store these blobs. And then you can retrieve it and display it, just like we did, right? Because we're taking that information, and once we have this blob, we again use URL create object URL to be able to create this source element that we give out to the image resource. So when we look at a piece of code, this is the example of my DOM element that represents my file, my input file. In here, I look at the files, and that basically tells me that I'm able to support more than one. And once I know I have some files selected, I'm able to access the first file, which gives me a file object. At that point, I can look at its properties and say, what type of object is this? Is this the type of object that I know how to deal with? Is this the one that I expected, right? And I can show you an alert, the image is invalid, or I can go ahead and continue. And then I can say, oh, furthermore, I'm going to take that file and generate a data URL from it. And once I have that data URL, I can go in, and when the actual file reader API finishes loading the image, or in this case, the file, I'm able to say, now I know I have what it takes, or the result, to be able to assign it to the source of this image tag element that I'm using, which is what I was doing in my example code, right? I was actually reading these objects both initially from the file system and then displaying them in the screen. So what are the benefits, again, when you look at it? The benefits of this is that using this file API allows you to access all these file system resources without having to have plugins, right? Because in the past, in able to achieve this, you had to use ActiveX controls or any other things like that. That's the the initial value of it right away, right? So this is a really nice way of continuing without having to have that kind of dependency on external components. The next thing is that because from a file we get these blobs, we're able to do all kinds of things with the blobs. We're able to store them in the database. We're able to send them out into the web via XHR, via WebSockets. We're able to take this information and even take advantage of the new Windows Runtime APIs to then interoperate with things like streams and be able to take streams and create blobs out of those streams, and then be able to take that data and create a file from it. So you can imagine that you have a camera API that you want to use. That camera gives you a feed. That feed comes in as a stream. That stream then can be stored as a file because it goes through an object, which is a blob, and then that blob can be turned into a file. Now, if you're using the web side of things, you can then start manipulating these different objects by using the navigators. So there's a couple of navigator APIs that we've introduced, like navigator.msSaveBlob and navigator.msSave or loadBlob, which gives you the ability to take these blobs and then use whatever associated program is there with them and display them. So you can imagine taking a Word document that I store in the database as a blob, and then reading that blob, the Word document blob, and be able to just tell the system, hey, go and display this document, this blob, with whatever default program is there. Because of the MIME type association that exists as part of this blob and file, this will be able to display in the Word document. So these types of capabilities, right, are the things that you are looking to be able to map these local resources that you're using with the rest of your system. Now, the last one of them that I want to show you is IndexedDB. And IndexedDB, as it says, is an actual full-fledged database that we are providing for you, which is a W3C standard that we're currently working on. And let me actually show you a demo, a little bit different one. Because one of the nice things about this, and now I'm going to show you an actual Metro-style application that I built. Right? One of the nice things about that one, this particular scenario, is that I'm able to go in, and you can tell I'm into food. This is a cookbook one. It's not this is a generic cookbook one. Here you can bring up this kind of cookbook application. We've broken it up by breakfast, lunch, dinner, and dessert, right? You can look at the different pieces. That's all your different recipes for lunch. Want a Reuben sandwich? We're going to be very hungry after this talk. You can see the ingredients. You can see the instructions on how to put this together. But one of the nice things about it is that because we use the database as the mechanism to store all this data, and these are objects, I was able to create all kinds of indices in the database that allows me to categorize the information. So every time that I'm actually selecting lunch, what is happening is that I go to the IndexedDB and I say, give me everything that is of type lunch. I go in and I say, give me everything that is of type breakfast. And then I create a cursor that I iterate through that gives you that listing. And the nice thing about doing that is that then I can also search it. So I can go over here and I say, okay, I want to search for chocolate. All right, so there's my chocolate pudding. That's great. But then the thing to, let's say, kick it another notch, those of you who are familiar, and making it even more integrated is by allowing this Metro-style application to now integrate with the search capability. So if you remember, one of the things that we demonstrated is the ability to go in and just type here, cake, right? And in this case, I'm publishing my cookbook as having a search capability. That's why it's showing up. And from here, I can select it and say, yes, I'm going to be searching for cake in this application. And what it does is that it takes advantage of all this infrastructure that I put together and these schema definitions for my database. And now I can see the different types of recipes. I can go ahead and say chocolate. And there it is. Or I can go ahead and say beef. Right? And I can see it on chunks, grilled bulgogi. And in here, you can see all the instructions for it and all the ingredients and everything that I need. But what enabled this was the fact that I have a full-fledged database that I'm able to integrate with the system to keep track of all this information, right, and exchange. So how difficult it is, first of all, concept-wise. Well, when we think of databases, we normally think relational. Most of us, anyways, right? And when we think relational, we think of SQL, and we think of all this sort of very elaborate sort of store procedure calls you can make and all that. Very nice. The problem is that SQL, while it is a standard that is not really shared in the same way across all databases. So all databases have their own version of SQL in many ways, right? And while you might claim that there's a database that has the biggest market share, and therefore you follow that particular SQL syntax, that's still very specific to it. So what we decided to do in the working group is kind of go away from that. Go away from SQL and say, can we provide you another mechanism that still gives you the optimized indexing, the optimized data retrieval? And that's when we decided to go with the ISAM database. So when we look at IndexedDB, it's an ISAM database which still has concepts of the actual database name. It has the ability to store information instead of tables as object stores. And what that means is that there's this key that you associate with the object, which is your primary key, and then you have the rest of your structure. Unlike tables, you cannot just automatically say, oh, there's 5 columns, so I know that my object has been broken up into those 5 columns. If I want to be able to search into those 5 columns like I normally do with SQL, I will have to define indexes into my object. So I will say, I have an object called developer. And developers have names, they have salaries, they have skill sets. And I want to go ahead and be able to search into skill sets. So I create an index that looks at the property skill sets or looks at the property language. And now I know what languages they code on or what capabilities they have. And I can search based on that. Now, what that also means is that the query mechanism for just getting a list, you have to use a cursor via an API. And joins are done basically in JavaScript. You get all of your table information and you join it yourself, right? That also means that when you look at the transactions are pretty straightforward. With a relational database, you normally have logs on databases, tables, rows on read-writes, transactions, right? With an IndexedDB, you end up locking the whole database or your object stores, and that's it. That's the level of locking that you have. And one of the things that is the most significant difference is in the way in which transactions are committed. With relational databases, normally you go in and you explicitly create a transaction, and if you don't do anything to it, it rolls back by itself, right? You have to at some point say commit, and that's what actually finalizes your transaction. Excuse me. With IndexedDB, it's sort of the opposite, in which you explicitly create your transaction, but if you don't do anything with it, it commits. Now, you can explicitly say abort, but if you don't touch it, it will commit. So it's a different kind of behavior in that sense, right? Property lookups are done via indexes, and filters can be done via key ranges on a cursor. And I know I'm going really fast to it, but I only got 20 more seconds. So I'm trying to give you as much as I can, but you feel free to come and ask me questions later. The way that you normally access this is that you go ahead and open your IndexedDB database. You give it a database name. The model IndexedDB supports two types of APIs, a synchronous API and an asynchronous API. The synchronous API is intended to be used in a web worker thread. The asynchronous API is intended to use both in your UI thread and in a web worker. You can use both. Most of us browser vendors are providing support for asynchronous. So that's what you will see. Nobody has support for synchronous right now, the synchronous APIs. But what this introduces is a style of coding which might not be as familiar to some people because it's very asynchronous in nature. Once you make a request to the server, you have to wait back for the server to come back and tell you, did it work or did it not? And on success means that it worked. Great, we're all happy. On error means that it did not work. And you define these event handlers. And once you actually are in the event handler itself, that's where you can get the result. And in this case, you're getting the database result. And now you have your database. You're able to access the version of the database. From the database, you can then define the scope of your transactions. You can say, this transaction that I'm working on is a read-only, read-write, or a schema-changing one, which we call version change. And once we do that, we're able to go in and say, oh, these are all the object stores that are going to be bound or participate into this transaction. Then we go ahead and use the transaction to open the object store. And once we have the object store, we create requests, or we make requests to the server to get items. And items are retrieved one at a time. And you can pass, in this case, the key to that object or that record so that you can get the object back. And once you actually get the on success, you will process the true result in the process get handler, which is what it shows here, right? So in summary, very quickly, the type of situations in which you want to use the IndexedDB is when you have a lot of data, information that you want to be able to search very quickly, information that you want to be able to access through very quickly, and you want to be able to correlate in many different dimensions based on the properties that you're manipulating in your JavaScript objects. Now notice that this only handles JavaScript objects. So we are not talking about, C# or XAML or any of the other languages. This is strictly JavaScript. In here, you can retrieve groups of data by using cursors and indexes. You can filter data using key ranges, which is a way of scoping and saying, only give me, out of this list that you're about to return me, things that match this upper limit and this lower limit. And then, moving on to the last set of technologies that we care about is the use of XHR and WebSockets to upload and download content from your server. Now, putting it all together, what we have seen. We've seen that really not all offline applications are created equal. There really is a spectrum. And when you look at that spectrum, we started with a very simple application that lets us use application cache for caching locally all these file resources that we care about. We continue by defining a more sophisticated application that now has to keep some state or some information about the user. And that information is textual in nature, but it needs to be aware of whether the application is online or offline from the network in order for it to be able to upload that. And then keep that information in this local storage so that it works. We also look at how we can take advantage of the file APIs and to be able to create and access information from the file system and then view and manipulate data and store it away so that it can in the future be uploaded. And then we look at a couple of recipe book type applications which take advantage of a more sophisticated database with a lot more storage capability and capacity to be able to access all kinds of data sets and searches and index information properly. And then at the end, we saw that if you wanted to go all the way out, all the way to the right-hand side and create a very sophisticated application that does both syncing to the client and syncing to the cloud, you need to start implementing things like XHR and WebSockets, right? So in summary, we know that there are different types of applications that you can make better. But the whole point is about enabling your applications to be able to handle these offline connectivity issues that we all face every time, because that's the expectations that your users will have, right? And you want to anticipate the use cases that your users will have when there's no network connectivity, whether they will expect your application to work or not, whether it will be good enough to just say, sorry, we're not connected, so we're not going to show you the last tweets that you did. It's too bad, you know, or whether it'll show you the last tweets that you did and maybe even prepare some, but then it won't actually execute them until later. And this is very easily done by caching in many cases and storing databases in others. So thank you very much. These are some of the related sessions. There's some sessions on WebSockets, file access, and the performance track that are really going to be happening tomorrow, which are really useful. You already see some of these ones already. And if you want additional information about all these things that I show you here, you can go to the IE test drive site and look at our blogs, and a lot of this stuff will be in more detail explained there. And thank you very much.